again, as we mentioned before, e-trafficking is not a new crime. It's not a new criminal activity. It refers to the integration of digital technologies in human trafficking. Therefore, the identification modalities, the identification measures are often quite similar, but yet they need to be adjusted to cover this new world of technology. What do we mean by early or preliminary identification? Preliminary identification stands for the initial screening, the collection of elements that are quite obvious, which might create suspicions that the person might be a victim of trafficking or might be at risk of being trafficked. It begins at the moment the first responder has the first contact with the person who could be a potential victim, either because the person asks support directly and identifies himself or herself as a victim of trafficking, or because he needs support and assistance to meet other needs, health needs quite often, legal needs or others. Who can do this like early preliminary identification? All those who have direct contact with migrants, asylum seekers, as well as people who don't fall this category. They are citizens or non-citizens of EU countries, foreigners or even nationals of a country. So anyone who has contact with the target group. Authorities, of course, police, border police, the Coast Guard, immigration offices, reception assistants, authorities responsible to assess asylum claims, the asylum service, anyone who is in charge of dealing, conducting, providing services to the target population, meaning migrants, foreigners, asylum seekers, but often people who specialize in providing services to specific target groups, such as teenage girls and unaccompanied minors. This could be health personnel, judges, first responders, civil servants, organizations present in the places of arrivals, organizations or volunteers who provide service, provide support at the disembarkation points, close to the borders, staff and reception facilities, pretty much anyone. And this is the key target group of this training as well, to give an overview and provide like specific skills, specific tools to everyone who might be in touch of a potential trafficking victim. Where and when this early or preliminary identification can take place, pretty much anywhere. At the source, when a boat arrives, at the airport as well, because trafficking doesn't necessarily mean illegal transfer or illegal entry in a country. It could also occur through legal means of movement. Therefore, the airports, the ports, the shores, these are all locations where the early preliminary identification can take place. During the registration process, when a person applies for asylum, during assessment processes, often organizations conduct vulnerability assessments in order to identify needs of the population and provide relevant services. In other circumstances, for example, health clinics, medical facilities are also spaces where preliminary identification may take place. And of course, during the asylum interview. So the early preliminary identification is the process that is being conducted by anyone, like not necessarily mandated organizations or specialized staff, and it is the process of collecting key information or collecting key observation that might create a suspicion that someone might be a victim of trafficking. Now, what is the formal or official identification? The terminology might differ based on the literature and the language used, but usually preliminary identification is used as a way to describe any identification process that occurs by non-specialized people, and formal identification by screening agencies or entities authorized and mandated to go through the formal identification detection process. So formal identification aims to establish, to determine whether someone is a victim of torture or is at risk of being, victim of trafficking, or at risk of being trafficked. It constitutes of a deep interview. The interview aims to collect very detailed information around the different elements of the trafficking, action, means, and purpose. So it's a very detailed interview. And the outcome of the interview might be, of course, prosecution, but also targeted protection services, of course, information provision, and a plan involving the survivor, the victim, on how to address key needs, including legal assistance, support from the authorities, etc. Who can be engaged in this formal identification process? Qualified and specially trained and authorized personnel, meaning bodies specialized in providing support and assistance to victims of trafficking, law enforcement authorities. We referenced yesterday the anti-trafficking unit of the Hellenic Police, which is key in the formal identification process, judicial authorities, such as the public prosecutor, personnel of NGO or different organizations and authorities mandated to identify, to detect victims of trafficking. I don't know how many of you are aware of the National Organization of Health, AOD, who also has trained personnel to identify victims of trafficking. Other organizations, UN agencies who are present in reception centers, and they are assigned to identify, to detect and refer victims of trafficking. So main two differences: formal identification occurs by qualified, trained, authorized and mandated personnel of different entities, including national authorities, judicial authorities, of course the police, and in some occasions NGOs and UN personnel. Preliminary identification occurs by non-specialized staff, anyone who might be in touch of people at risk, basically. Asylum seekers, migrants, people with undetermined legal status, as well as nationals in some occasions. Now, in order for staff, specialized and non-specialized staff, to be able to identify who is a trafficking victim, UNODC, as well as different bodies and national authorities, they have developed a set of different indicators, a set of different elements they assess in order to identify, to come up with a conclusion on whether someone is a trafficking victim or not. The list of indicators, as we are going to see later on, is not exhaustive. Again, it pretty much depends on the individual circumstances of the case. However, all these different indicators, they serve the purpose of connecting whether these individual circumstances, they are to some extent or to which extent are linked to the different factors that we discussed earlier, which are action, means, and purpose. So preliminary indicators, these are indicators that could also be quite like evident, and they have to do with the profile of the person. They have to do with different like individual elements such as gender, age, origin, language, potential body language, different like attitudes and behaviors the person develops. We saw during the video the two journalists, they mentioned that the girl was very shy or was about to start like crying, was confused, was very like distracted. So all these elements, all these like attitudes and behaviors which are quite like obvious, especially if you work in this context and if you are in like regular contact with asylum seekers, refugees, and people in displacement, they are elements that you can easily identify. Then we have specific indicators that have to do with different groups, such as children, adolescent girls, women, and we have indicators that have to do with a specific type of exploitation. Domestic workers, incidents of sexual exploitation, begging is also quite is also a crime that is related to e-trafficking and children in particular, and labor exploitation. There are different sets of indicators developed by different bodies, including national authorities and European and international organizations. These characteristics, these indicators, these red flags, they might vary from one country to another based on the nature and the type of trafficking occurs. For example, there are different set of indicators similar to the ones used globally and established by UNODC, but they might like be different when it comes to trafficking detection at the borders between US and Mexico. There are different sets of indicators when it comes to detection of trafficking in Europe, and this pretty much depends on the nature of trafficking, the different ways of transportation and transfer, the different language backgrounds of people who might be at risk of being trafficked, the different authorities who are in charge of determining if someone is a trafficking victim or not. All this to say that the list is not exhaustive, it is indicative, and different organizations, countries, state authorities, they also have a subset of different indicators that it describes or helps the identification of this specific area of the world, the specific country, etc., based on the nature and the profile of trafficking incidents and trafficking victims. We already mentioned that indicators might be related to the personal condition. These indicators might be declared or undeclared, identified by the staff. Personal conditions, again, they have to do with the physical condition. If someone is hurt physically, for example, if you see bruises on someone's body, if you see a person crying, feeling confused, feeling completely disoriented, these are things that you can identify through your interaction with someone, or could be declared, meaning that someone will approach you and tells you, listen, I feel this way, or I have been hurt, I have been beaten, etc. Other indicators or red flags could be related to the travel and the experiences in the transit countries. Again, these are information that might be shared with you by someone or might be identified throughout the conversation or by observation, as we are going to see later on. Red flags and indicators related to the current conditions in the hosting country. Where does this person live? Does the person live with many other people in the same room, in the same location? Does this person have access to his or her phone? Does this person is able to leave the place where she or he lives? Indicators that might come up during an interview process, information, feelings, emotions that a person might share with you, as well as behavioral issues in reception centers, in rehabilitation shelters, in safe shelters where people might be accommodated and hosted. Often people develop certain patterns when it comes to their behavior. They might be very shy, they might be very introverts, and these behaviors also might change. So observation is key when it comes to the identification of the different patterns of the different behavioral changes. People might be lying or might be hiding information or information about themselves or about what they do. All these are different elements that can be identified or can be declared directly by the person who might be at risk of being trafficked. So again, personal conditions, meaning physical condition or individual characteristics that have to do with the country of origin, language, gender, and age. The fact that someone might travel with his or her family or travel alone. Under this category, we can also consider unaccompanied minors. Again, they are more exposed to risks such as trafficking. Travel conditions. How did this person travel? Did she or he travel alone? Did he have to go through different countries, different borders? Was she or he accompanied by someone who was taking care of all the different travel arrangements, for example? Conditions in the hosted country. Where does she or he live? Does she live alone or with other people? Behaviors, attitudes during the interview process, or behaviors and attitudes in general. Being scared, being afraid, crying, feeling shocked, feeling shame. These are all patterns that you can identify. Now, indicators that have to do with more precisely with e-trafficking. We already discussed yesterday some of the indicators that have to do with the recruitment, such as fraudulent advertisements. We can also present and discuss about some other examples of warning signals of trafficking that have to do either with sexual exploitation or with labor exploitation. For example, promises of unrealistically high payments. This is also a good indication that should raise a flag when it comes to labor exploitation. Information about charging administrative fees to people who want to apply for a job, for a position. Very generalistic job descriptions. No address of the recruitment agency. No contact details. No phone numbers. Or very generalistic email addresses. Email addresses that they are repeated several times under different advertisements. Information about accommodation in a shared room with a large number of people. All these different red flags should worry you, should raise suspicions, which will then lead you to a more, let's say, in-depth information collection, you or a specialized agency. Red flags related to sexual exploitation. We mentioned yesterday different practices, different recruitment tactics, such as the lover-boy approach or sextortion. Again, advertisements that show a picture of a very young girl, although the advertisement makes reference to adult services. However, the picture shows a very young girl. Advertisements that offer sex services only online. Sex workers changing locations very often. These are all red flags that might raise suspicions when it comes to trafficking, more precisely e-trafficking cases. Now, specific indicators or red flags in the context of reception facilities, accommodation centers, shelters for unaccompanied minors, environment that has to do with people in displacement. Migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees are people who are hosted in these facilities, and sometimes they might show additional or slightly different signals, red flags, which are associated with information technologies as well as the risk of human trafficking. These could be signs related to their mood, extreme sadness or anxiety, or not feeling comfortable with NGO workers or aid workers or facility staff. Often we develop like relationships because we engage, we provide services with targeted populations. However, this relationship might change because the person might not feel comfortable to share anymore, might not feel the trust relationship might have been interrupted. Other signals, excessive use and frequent replacement of phone devices, of smartphones. If you see someone changing phones or tablets or whatever device very often, this could also be a red flag. Receiving packages by unknown people, such as mobiles, clothes, expensive presents, spending a lot of time in locked rooms, using different devices, spending a lot of time in internet cafes and places where you have uninterrupted access to internet technologies, applications, and social media. Creation of different ad hoc Facebook or other application profiles. This could also be a red flag. Excessive use of smartphones with apps such as WhatsApp, Telegram, online Russian roulette. Telegram is an app. I had no idea. I found out while preparing myself for this training. It is an app that facilitates, of course, communication. There are also different apps depending on the country where this crime occurs. We saw in the video that there are specific apps that address Arab-speaking population in specific countries. The same applies to countries to African countries. There are targeted apps developed for specific countries or for specific language group as well. General considerations on trafficking indicators and how to use them. Again, and I will repeat that, there is no exhaustive list of indicators. you really need to have your eyes open to really observe and identify changes in behaviors, in attitudes, in emotions and feelings, in relationships, in addition to all these quite additional indicators that we mentioned before with regards to the personal circumstances, conditions, the use of technologies, the regular changes in moods, indicators, red flags that have to do with the means of transfer and transportation, the conditions in the hosting country, but again, there is no exhaustive list. There are different guidance books and reports that can assist you and elaborate your knowledge and understanding. We can also share with you some additional materials, but in addition to the UNODC indicators and red flags, there are a variety of different flags that you can identify during your interaction with potential trafficking victims. Of course, you need to be updated regularly because technologies evolve, technologies change, and it is important to take into consideration that these red flags might occur during different periods and interactions with the potential victim, trafficking victim.